Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat. And today I'm going to do a different one than I had planned. I had totally planned on discussing squats. But I saw a post on my fitness Facebook page when I first woke up. And we're going to discuss instead hormones and body composition. And for the record, a lot of people have asked me on the one on sleep that I did yesterday, well, you don't seem to follow the rules. If you're getting up working at 3 a.m., it's like I go back to bed. I actually sleep better after I eat. So I usually sleep at least 6 hours. I get up early in the morning, eat breakfast, maybe film a breakfast chat, work on some client stuff, get some work done for an hour or so, and then I go back to bed for another 2 or 3 hours, right? That's what I personally do. So this is not a full official wake up time. I'm going to go back to sleep after this video is filmed. So I put up a meme on my fitness Facebook page, which for those who can't find it, it's actually the only way to contact me. It's linked in the description under every video. It's on my About tab. I put up a meme kind of making fun of the idea that a lot of people are still caught up in hormone hypothesis of obesity, right? And my stance there is the normal mainstream stance in nutritional science. The whole idea of the insulin-driven model of obesity has been so heavily debunked with study after study after study, and in clinical trials and in people's real-world practice, obesity experts who actually take 400-pound people and get them down to 200 pounds and so on for a living in the actual obesity wards. It's been debunked. Only a handful of quacks believe it. Real experts don't believe in this anymore. But, it's this idea that hormones massively influence body fat. They don't. Not saying they don't influence them at all, but they are nowhere near the primary driver. They do not affect it anywhere near as much as your caloric intake does. They can affect calories out, right? Because they can affect energy levels. They can affect calories in because they affect appetite. Okay, but it's still calories in, calories out. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about an insulin problem or PCOS in women. We know how this stuff works, right? It still is following the calories in, calories out model when you look at what actually happens with these hormones. So he made the statement, and think about how extreme this is. Well, if you're saying hormones don't matter, then why do bodybuilders go on a bunch of gear and gain muscle when they're in a calorie deficit when they're cutting? Oftentimes they don't. They oftentimes lose muscle. But think about how extreme that statement is. Because I want to give you guys an example of very modest use. And this is not glorifying gear, telling anyone to go out and use gear or anything. But you have to understand that when gear is taken, there's a dose-dependent relationship in the amount of muscle you gain. Now keep in mind, in order to even make this point, this individual had to take an extreme example that requires large amounts of drugs to be put into someone's body before the hormones actually mattered. Okay? That's a takeaway. Large amounts of synthetic drugs had to be used before we saw a small impact. This is not something your body could do on its own just because you're sick or something that's happening internally. It requires drugs. Again, to see a small effect. Because novice lifters, ranked novices, can also lose body fat while gaining a little bit of muscle, can't they? Right? Yeah, this happens. So how does that fit into his same question? Calories in, calories out are still affecting the body fat. But let's talk about the muscle growth then, because what usually happens is that for bodybuilders or lifters, anyone in general, to pull off what he described, they usually have to increase what they're taking. In other words, if they stay on the same amount they used when bulking, they still might lose muscle mass when they cut. A lot of people seem to be oblivious to this fact. They've never looked at what bodybuilders do. How many bodybuilders, when you look at what they do, they double what they're on when they cut. They double the amount of total stuff they take. They double it or triple it. And a lot of times they still only maintain 100% of their muscle. They still don't always gain. Sometimes they gain. But I'll give you an example, like a very, very modest, that would be very conservative by today's standards. Let's say some guy, bodybuilder, whatever you want to call him, is taking 500 milligrams of testosterone. That's going to put him about 5 times the normal range, roughly. About 5 times what he would produce if he was producing a healthy average amount. So here's your baseline. We're now 5 times above that. 5 times. Now, if we're talking about these other hormones that people want to talk about with obesity, like insulin, if your insulin is 5 times higher than normal, it's going to kill you. You will die. So, hey, in that case, insulin caused a lot of weight loss. Okay? You're 300 pounds and your insulin spike, because it's 5 times what the body could normally produce ever, and you drop dead, right? When you go into a coma, you're going to lose 250 pounds really fast. So using this same sort of example, well, insulin caused a lot of weight loss. But it's not going to happen because this is not how the body works. But 5 times the normal range of testosterone. Again, he has a testosterone of 5 men. And let's say this person bulks on this for 6 months straight. And then they do an aggressive cut. A really aggressive cut, and they stay on 500 milligrams. They won't gain muscle, especially if they were on it for 6 months already, because what happens, your body gains muscle in proportion to your testosterone levels. Well, even if you don't train, we know that this happens in studies. And then once you reach the ceiling of the anabolic effect, because again, your body fights back against gaining muscle, doesn't like to gain muscle, you're going to reach a state of homeostasis to where that stuff is no longer putting extra muscle on you, only the training is, and it's maintaining the muscle that it gave you in the right nutrition environment. If this person stays on 500 milligrams and does a really aggressive cut to try to get down to like 8% body fat, and they stay on that same amount that they used for 6 months, they'll probably lose a little bit of muscle with the lower, because the calories are still, their calorie intake is down. They're not getting an additional benefit from using this stuff. Now, if they just went on when they cut, they'll gain muscle. But if they're still staying at the same hormone level, they're going to possibly lose a couple pounds of muscle during this cut. So a lot of times what guys will do is instead of using 500, they'll go to 1,000. They'll double what he's on. Then what happens? We got a new anabolic stimulus to go with the caloric restriction. He might gain a very small amount of muscle during this cut. It's not going to be 10 pounds. Okay, it's not some enormous amount. He might gain a pound or 2 of muscle instead of losing a pound or 2. By going from 5 times the amount the body could produce to the 10 times the amount the body could produce. You see how extreme these examples have to get before this matters? And if everything's normalized, again, it stops being a real benefit. So examples like this are terrible examples being used to try to debunk something that is heavily studied, widely understood, has pretty good consensus in the entire nutrition world, obesity world, medical world. Right? There's pretty good consensus for this. That the hormone end still just affects calories in, calories out. But even if we look at this extreme example we have to use, even if it stays constant, it's no longer having the meaningful impact. It has to be changed. And even then, at no point did we discuss hormones and they're still having to do with the amount of body fat. It was only with muscle tissue. Which comes back to another point. Highly insulinogenic foods are extremely muscle preserving when you're on a cut. They're better at preserving muscle than they are at preserving body fat. I'd venture to say there's at least some supporting data that higher insulinogenic foods cause more fat loss in a deficit. Why? Because they're better at retaining muscle tissue. And if you're retaining muscle tissue on the same calorie deficit, you're burning less muscle Therefore, you're burning slightly more body fat. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.